Hello and welcome to the great telco debate of 2021. I'm Guy Daniels, Director of Content at TelecomTV. It's our final day and our final debate. Less than 2 weeks ago, we were completing preparations for our in-person event in London. And then, of course, we had the sudden return of COVID restrictions. And so, for the second year running, we are taking the sensible approach and staging the event online. You can see the full lineup of debates here, and there are more details on the TelecomTV website. If you missed any, they will all be available to watch on demand very soon. In fact, I think the first 2 days are already up on the site. This is our second debate today and focuses on the relationship between telcos and the hyperscalers. It was the overwhelming winner of our viewer vote for the choice of our final discussion. And just as we would have done in person at our London event, each 50-minute debate features a mix of expert witness statements from our invited guests, an accompanying motion that we want you to vote on, and a Q&A discussion with questions from our audience. Joining me for today's debate today, once again, what a tongue twister that was, are my colleagues Ray Lemaitre, Editorial Director at TelecomTV, and Chris Lewis, CEO of Lewis Insight. Ray, our viewers voted and they wanted hyperscalers over security, which was the other choice they could have had. But this really is a perfect fit, isn't it? It allows us to look at the evolution of the industry.
Yes, Guy, well, I'm not surprised it was chosen by the viewers because there's hardly a more contentious topic in the industry today. Just how will these relationships evolve? Will the early mover operators that put their faith in hyperscaler platforms for critical functions gain a competitive advantage, or will they wish they'd held back and not been as bold? I'm sure there are lots of questions out there, so don't miss out on the chance to put your questions to our panel of experts. Submit them now and do it quickly, as we'll be asking them on a first come, first served basis. Guy, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. And please use the form on the website to submit your questions. Now, it wouldn't be the great telco debate without Chris Lewis and Graham Wild. And once again, they have written the motions for the debates. And it's these motions we want you to vote on. Chris, one more time, remind us how you decide who votes for and who against.
Well, Guy, this time, well, just before this time of year, Graham and I get together and obviously finalise the topics to be discussed. And then we come up with the motions. And then because they are deliberately contentious or deliberately shaped to make people think about the industry and the challenges of the industry, we don't just draw straws. We literally toss a coin. Or in this case, for some bizarre reason, we had no coin, but Graham had a dice in his pocket. So we rolled a dice.
Well, the dice man cometh whenever you want him. Early this week, Chris and Graham got together to record the all-important final motion. The hyperscalers represent an accelerated channel to the digital market for the CSPs.
This motion clearly digs into the relationship between the telecom industry and the hyperscalers, trying to find the right positioning between the telcos and those global players and what they bring to the table, and matching that with what the telecom providers bring fundamentally on a national level.
I'm speaking for this motion for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that hyperscalers have the capability to transform CSPs' businesses themselves. And the second reason is that hyperscalers can help and work with CSPs to transform the businesses of their customers. I think this is a marriage made in heaven, and I would vote for the motion.
I'm against this motion because I believe the role of the connectivity providers, this industry built up from fixed and mobile, indeed other types of connectivity, really needs to focus on what it's delivering to the customer base in consumer and in the business markets. Hyperscalers can, of course, help them in terms of the back office, in terms of analytics, in terms of the heavy lifting on the IT side. But I believe the telcos have to build a closer relationship with all of their customer elements in order to stay relevant, in order to expose new services, and to bring forward the benefits of that new agile, hyper-powered engine within the telecom industry.
And later in the show, we'll see if Chris and Graham manage to sway your votes. They can be very persuasive. Time now for our expert witness statements before we commence our Q&A discussion. So let's now meet our special guests for this final show of the year. Hello everyone, thank you all for joining us on the great telco debate. It's time now for our opening comments, and as always, we are imposing a strict time limit of 3 minutes max for each of your expert witness statements. So let me first introduce Johan Christensen, who is the CEO of City Network. Johan, good to see you again. May we please have your expert witness statement?
All right, thanks so much. Just to set the stage, we're a global cloud provider out of Europe, and I thus represent more of the public cloud aspect, so to speak, in this debate. So I keep coming back to the debate from last year, where I had a stance where I think that there's be careful what you wish for. I think that the hyperscalers will continue to chip at a lot of the services that I think in a different world, the telcos would like to be the ones that actually deliver. I'm sad to say that I still feel that the innovation level on the telco side will not match or rival that of the hyperscalers, which put them at a disadvantage and in commercial negotiations and everything else, and thus could ultimately in the long run be a risk for the telcos as well, right? So there's of course a ton of opportunities coming up with the new technology. There's a lot of risk as well, right? So you look at edge and IoT, for example, which seems like a slam shut win from a telco perspective, and to some extent it is, right? But then, I look at situations such as Microsoft taking over AT&T's network, for example. Will there be any data processing from a telco perspective, or will that actually slowly but surely be taken over by the hyperscalers as well? And then you look at from a market perspective, where I think Europe might be 5-6 years behind and have not gotten as far. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. So it's a huge opportunity, but I'm afraid that there's a risk that telcos actually will lose out on some of those benefits. There's always going to be a play, of course, because you need to reach that edge in the IoT side, right? And then, of course, you kind of feel that the telcos are squeezed from every way, right? You have the 5G situation, open source like Magna and so forth, that allows everybody for a cheap amount of money to actually start connecting. How will that play out? And will that be a yet another push from the other side, so to speak? So I think that there's a lot of opportunities, but I'm a little afraid that the telcos will not take them, or even if they're seen, it takes too long. And then ultimately, I think, again, the conclusion from last year, I think will accelerate, where hyperscalers will continue to chip at the business that they want and leave, I don't want to say the scraps because it's not scraps, but leave that for the rest of the telcos, right? One side that I think is a wild card, particularly in Europe, but really anywhere in the world, maybe minus the hyperscaler countries like China and the US, right, is the regulatory side. So regulatory and security, I think, is something that local or regional players can do really well in. I think that's going to be a challenge over the next so many years. And I think by playing those cards right and aligning with the right types of partners, I think that there is a play there that I think all telcos should take seriously, because whether it's at the edge or centralized, I think that the telcos would be allowed to deliver something, at a more appropriate stack, so to speak, for example, the public sector, but also trickling down to the private sector as we move forward.
Thank you very much, Johan, for your opening statement there. As you say, lots of opportunities if telcos are willing to take them, but also an awful lot of risk as well. Well, next, I would like to introduce Andy Walker, Global Lead Communications and Media Industry at Accenture. Andy, welcome to the Great Telco Debate. Can we please have your expert witness statement?
Thank you much, and absolutely. So just brief introduction on Accenture in the space. We have roughly 50,000 people working in the communications industry across players globally. I think this is a great question to ask. And so stepping back, you start to say, all right, how are they interrelating, and what do they need from one another? Telecommunications is absolutely critical for the hyperscalers, right? So all the different applications they're rolling out, if they don't have high-speed bandwidth to get to consumers, to get to companies, they've got a problem, right? And so, as a result of this, what you've seen, and I guess I would also say, I don't necessarily think that hyperscalers want to be in the retail telecommunications industry, right? Guys on trucks connecting, doing installation, repair of fiber to the home. It's not really their core business. All that having been said, they have built some of the largest telecommunications networks in the world at this point, right? If you look at their data center builds, their capital expenditure into telecom, if you look at their undersea fiber, it is extremely robust. And some of the hyperscalers have even announced that they're in the enterprise business, right? So, and then if you look at consumer, what you're seeing from the hyperscalers is a direct push into the home, right? So owning the router, the set-top box, the experience. So then you start to say, all right, from a telecom perspective, what's our role here? How do we work our way out of this, right? And I think to the case of what telcos can pull from the hyperscalers and how they can accelerate their own business, there are some absolutely some opportunities, right? So one of the things is by moving their IT, which in the case of most telcos, most of the IT is fairly difficult, right? In a lot of cases, it's 30, 40 years old. The data is a mess. So moving that to the cloud, being able to take advantage of things like data-driven reinvention within their own businesses, that allows them to operate much more efficiently. It allows them to start to think about new products and offers, which I think is important. Allows them to segment their customers differently. I do think that Johan made a really good point, which is, okay, so you've got all this data, you may be able to run your business better, right? But what do your offers look like, and how are your offers as a telco competitive with the hyperscalers? And I think there is the heart of the problem, right? And I think, frankly, it's the biggest reason that telcos need to change and where they need to change, which is ultimately, if telcos have access to all this digital expertise, if they have access to better data, if they can start to design new platforms and products for their customers, to be able to enable that, they need to shift their ecosystem approach. They need to shift their innovation approach so that it is less top-down, it is less, made here, produced here, and it's more open so that they're incorporating the work of their partners. So with that in mind, those are kind of some of our thoughts on the debate.
Thank you very much, Andy, for your opening statement there. And as you say, it's important to remember and understand what each side is looking to get from the other. Well, let me now introduce our next guest, Andrew Coward, GM Software Defined Networking at IBM. Andrew, welcome back, fresh from the Edgeonomics debate. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Of course, thanks, Guy. Well, first of all, from an IBM perspective, and as a software company, we deploy our applications across many of the hyperscalers, and we want to use each of those environments depending on how they can reach our customers and how they can deploy best in each scenario. And in many ways, we kind of give our customers free choice whether deploying in private cloud, public cloud. And the network, of course, is a key component of that, particularly as we're finding increasingly these applications are spread between the clouds. So it's not just a simple question of being in one or the other. And this actually speaks to a kind of fundamental problem. If we look at the market for hyperscalers and what's already been seeded, if you like, by telco, the global networks, the carried load across the hyperscalers, I'd argue well exceeds any individual telco for sure about that global capacity. And so the fight now really is kind of bifurcated into two ways. On the one hand, I think the hyperscalers are saying to the telcos, life has been very complicated for you with all these choices around platforms, how you deploy software. We can make life a lot easier for you. And the second choice by some of the hyperscalers is, and by the way, we've got all this telco technology and we can replace your traditional vendors with everything else we're doing. We think both of those things are kind of a false dichotomy, i.e. do it all yourself, or just hand it all over to us and we'll take it from here. And we very much think there's a third way. And that third way is with the integrators, with the capabilities that players outside of the hyperscalers have, who've actually been in the business for a very long time, IBM included, where we as an industry package around all the things that are needed, platform-wise, analytics-wise, orchestration-wise, all the things that surround that, take away all those kind of hard decisions, which is essentially the hyperscalers' perspective, but leave the key decisions to the telcos, being how am I going to deliver radio? How am I going to deliver 5G core? if you like, if you're building a house in that analogy, you leave the decisions around what the kitchen looks like and the bathroom looks like to the homeowner, but don't leave the homeowner with choices around what kind of nails to pin the foundations in with. And so that's kind of the basis of really how much is going to get seeded by telco into cloud to basically run their services for them. And then finally, where I think the magic is more likely to happen is how we get applications that run in and between all these clouds to then get distributed out. And so from a land grab perspective or a kind of real estate perspective everywhere around the network, I just expect that each of the hyperscalers will be represented in each of the telcos kind of writ large across the industry as a way of delivering services.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for your opening statement. And it's good to remind everyone about the distributed nature of modern applications, which further complicates the picture of this debate. Well, our next guest joining us live today is Sanjay Mewada, who is Worldwide Marketing Leader at Microsoft. It's good to see you again, Sanjay. Can we now please have your expert witness statement?
Thank you. Good to be back. My witness statement was two parts, and I was actually going to start with the first, but given what was just said by Andy and Andrew both, I'll flip my statement a little bit and address some of the things they raised as concerned or as observations for hyperscaler telco dynamic. I'll address that first. And I'll address that from a Microsoft perspective, because these are also the same questions we get on a consistent basis. And so I represent the Azure for Operators side of Microsoft. And when we think of the telecom industry and working with operators, we think of it as a partnership. We do not see it as a competition. Much the way Microsoft is a platform provider, an applications provider to the automobile industry, to the pharmaceutical industry, much the same model. We don't want to be a car company. We don't want to be a pharmaceutical company, nor do we want to be a telco. We don't own any spectrum. We don't want to own any spectrum as well. And we have no intentions of competing with the operators in any way, shape, or form. We want to be the partner. Second thing was, we don't see this as a binary between we should do it all or you should do it all. It's a journey. Almost every operator will go through that journey at their own pace in a way that makes the most sense to them. It'll be a combination of on-prem, it'll be a combination of mixed hybrid implementation, it'll be a combination of cloud with stuff consumed as a service. And so no matter what their choice, we would drive it that way. And I bring this back to sort of this 10 key observations. If you are an operator, if you believe that 5G is real, and that is for the next 6 to 7 years, the primary platform for growth. If you believe that there is value to be created beyond just network connectivity. If you believe that both the combination of hyperscale cloud and 5G will create the industry-specific solutions like private networks, which allow for new revenue opportunities. If you believe that you have the opportunity to merge and create an ecosystem and work with partners to bring cloud skills, to bring cloud infrastructure that will accelerate your business, then you would see hyperscalers and certainly Microsoft as a partner and not as a competitor.
Thank you very much, Sanjay, for your opening statement. As you say, not competitors, but partners. And I think we'll be hearing more of that as the discussion goes on. Now, I'd like to introduce our final guest, Duncan Curry, who is Global Director, Strategic Alliances, Hyperscalers, TME at Red Hat. Duncan, welcome to the Great Telco Debate. Can we now have your expert witness statement, please?
Yeah, thank you, Guy. I think previous gentlemen have taken away most of my thunder out of what I was going to say here, but I think we're all focusing around the need for openness, the value of partnerships and the ecosystem in general. I think what we're seeing from Red Hat's perspective is that delivering new digital services to the market provides an opportunity for the CSPs, to evolve into becoming true DSPs here. And I think this is particularly opening up now through edge computing and private 5G, as we look at the business value that the telcos can enable or grab from partnerships with the hyperscalers. I think the edge and the enterprise use cases are driving where we need to go next in the industry. There are numerous use case examples where we see that telcos can win and monetize, the new business opportunities before them in the marketplace. I don't think we've seen an opportunity this big since the OTB providers came on the scene here. So I think edge is the next wave, and telcos must capture it. And the question is, how do they leverage and work with the hyperscalers and the wider ecosystem at play here? Because for CSPs to become DSPs, to use these acronyms, they need to choose to deliver platform services to their customers for their applications with more specific services. Andrew talked about the AI, the edge, leveraging ML for advancing the network autonomies and things, or services targeted at specific vertical industries like the automotive, retail, healthcare, the FSI, that we can also tap into as an ecosystem of partners here. And I think there are many options for deploying infrastructure to win these new digital services, all the way from building their own infrastructures, to fully managed application platforms, and even to SaaS full platforms. And I think we need to believe that you need to build the flexibility to match the business needs and the service requirements, the SLAs that customers and businesses require here. I think Red Hat is very much a strong advocate of open solutions that deliver flexibility and choice to the customers, but also to the ecosystem partners in general here, so that the DSPs can provide a best of breed offering from the wider partners like the GSIs, the NEPs, the ISVs, together with the hyperscalers. I think we all have a part to play here. I think the hyperscalers provide an intriguing option here because the infrastructure is in place to consume right now, enhancing that opportunity to move fast and accelerate offerings and ultimately time to revenue. So I think hyperscalers can definitely be a fit and accelerate the plans for the edge and for the enterprise when chosen for the right services and the right applications. So I think we're reaching a pivotal point in the industry's evolution where the intersection of the telco cloud networks with enterprise and private 5G and the applications and networks are creating the opportunity we're all seeking here together. The question is, how do we keep each other honest in that and maintain that innovation in an open environment?
Thank you very much, Duncan. Yes, the transition from CSP to DSP and the implications for the network is something that obviously we're tracking very closely at TelecomTV and hearing a lot about from our telco audience. Thank you everyone for your opening statements. Well, you've heard from our expert witnesses. Now it's time to challenge them. So send us your questions and we promise to get through as many as we can. Kerry Gilder, CEO of Colt, and Howard Watson, CTO of BT Group, weren't able to make it to this live show, but still wanted to contribute. I spoke with Kerry earlier and asked her if it's more a case of telcos and hyperscalers needing each other rather than competing. And will these partnerships always be symbiotic relationships, or are we going to end up with a power struggle?
I think it's a very good question because this is a debate that's happened at least since I've been in the industry, and the cloud has really come, to the forefront. Our take on this at Colt is that it is a partnership relationship. We have very good relationships with all of the hyperscalers, and I do think that they need us as much as we need them. If you think about it from an enterprise perspective, they think about the application, they think about the workload, they think about the cloud, and then they think about the connectivity. But cloud without connectivity, and that being a highly reliable, highly flexible and agile and secure environment, is not going to work. And we've seen the hyperscale community try to build fiber. They've tried to become telcos in some instances over the last really decade. And I think what they've decided is that's not the business that they want to be in, but they need strong partners in order to enable the business that they do want to be in, which is the applications, the workloads, and driving that content delivery down to the consumer or the enterprise. So I personally believe that as long as we can create value in the relationship, there always will be a good niche for both the hyperscaler and the telecommunications provider to play in.
And ahead of today's live debate, I spoke with Howard Watson, CTO at the BT Group, and asked him how he views the telco and hyperscaler relationship, and as a CTO, how the cloud giants can help him.
Well, I mean, the relationship sort of comes in, it's a sort of story of two parts, really. I think, we have mature relationships with a number of the hyperscalers, initially on the IT side. So we have used AWS, for example, for a long time for compute and storage for IT applications, the classic infrastructure as a service usage. But, from a network perspective, the critical question at the moment is edge, and what role do hyperscalers have to play in the edge of our networks, particularly as we continue to roll 5G out. And there I see, a number of ecosystems emerging. So, for example, we are rolling out what we call network cloud. So it's our own hosted, but cloud native solution for hosting our key network functions, such as the 5G core, but also in the future network related applications. I think then that will sit alongside solutions from some of the hyperscalers. So it's quite critical, for example, that we're able to deliver low latency services to customers and to allow developers who are part of, let's say, for example, the AWS ecosystem, to be able to write applications to use that low latency.
And our thanks to both Howard and Kerry for their contributions to the great telco debate.
Yeah, indeed. Chris, we've had a range of views from our expert witnesses. There's plenty there for our viewers to digest. Have you got a comment or first question for one of our guests?
Well, my initial comment, Guy, is, as ever, it's fantastic to get such a wide variety of perspectives from across the ecosystem. But if I might put one question, and Johan, since you referred to the debate last year, can I come to you perhaps? And my question to you is, in the years that you've been working, building City Network and working with your customers and providing the role that you do, how has the relationship with the telcos changed? Are they now being pushed to be that awful phrase we've had for many years, sort of mere utility bandwidth providers, or are they partners in some cases? Is there a wide variety of those telcos you work with? So how do you see it from your point of view working with them?
Well, listen, I think there's a huge difference in what player you are, right? If you're a hyperscaler or you're like more of a normal enterprise, you have different bargaining power. There's no doubt that the telcos are needed and everybody needs bandwidth and so forth, right? But coming back to being just a utility, I think that there's a great risk for that if the innovation does not, pick up, so to speak. From our point of view, we have good relationships, but we're also on an even keel, I would say, right? I don't think that even keel is there when it comes to the hyperscalers. The value add from a hyperscaler's perspective to an enterprise is so much greater. That's where the innovation happened. That's where the future lies in many cases, so to speak, right? And the utility is what we need, of course, to get there, like anything else. I'm being a little bit harsh to make the point. I do believe that as you become that super scale type of company, you have a play that makes the telco more of utility. I hear what Sanjay is saying about the partnership, and of course, the partnership is there between those players. But with the growth, I think that there's just going to be more and more pressure to be kind of at the I don't know how to express it, to do what the hyperscalers need and want.
Yeah, thank you very much, Johan. You talked about innovation there, and I think that the pace of telecoms innovation has only just been brought into perspective by the pace of innovation at the hyperscalers. There are two separate speeds we're going at there. Ray, we've given our audience a lot of time now to get their questions ready and send them in. So what do we have for our panel of experts?
Okay, thanks, Guy. Yes, well, the questions have been coming in. And as I said at the beginning, It's a first come, first served. And so I'm starting with a question that we've actually had in for a few days now. And it's a very straightforward and short question. And that question is, will there ever be convergence between the hyperscalers and the telcos? Will we ever see those two entities become one? Would anybody like to answer that question? Maybe give a perspective on there. Do you think we'll ever see any M&A? Okay, we'll come to Sanjay first and then to Andrew.
So I can, as I said, only speak from Microsoft's perspective per se. And as mentioned earlier, we don't want to be an operator. That said, there is enormous scope for cooperation. And so when you think of, you may want to flip the question and say, where are the touch points between an operator and a hyperscaler that will end up working so closely that effectively it will be seamless? Edge, obviously, is a good example of that. Private networks would be another example of that, because ultimately, why are you deploying a 5G private network, for example, is to accelerate Industry 4.0 or any of the other enterprise transformations that enterprises would like to undertake. And at one end of that are entities such as Microsoft, and at the other end of enabling all of that is the telecom operator. Same thing at the edge. Edge is probably going to be where you'll see that first convergence of what hyperscalers bring, not just in terms of underlying platforms for the edge, but also in terms of the broader ecosystem of developers, broader ecosystems of apps that then can be leveraged by operators, depending on how they want to deploy their near edge and far edge, and how close, as Howard said, on-prem or otherwise. And that convergence of interest, that convergence of technology, that convergence of driving the right outcome for the enterprise customers or the end user customers, that is where we see the most closest cooperation, the most beneficial and most synergistic cooperation. Does that mean that there will be acquisitions across the board? Potentially, but the first step in that direction will be these key touch points in that value chain where the cooperation becomes extremely close.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. And Andrew, we'll come to you next.
All right. Well, I mean, convergence isn't monolithic, really, is it? I mean, it's not one hyperscaler wins it all, and that platform and that piece of software and all the things that come with it take all. We're living in a multi-hyperscaler world. And so as the networking industry increasingly pushes to x86 and cloud-based software and Kubernetes, etc., we'll expect the convergence will happen at that level. And then it will be a question of whether to run the radio in one cloud, in the private cloud, or in a public cloud yourself. So I think the convergence point is at a very different place than a kind of winner takes all to one of the hyperscalers. And I'd caution from a telco perspective, if you think that one hyperscaler has all the answers and you're going to put your chip on that exclusively, then that's no more different than betting on a traditional telco vendor and saying I'm going to cede everything to one of those Ericssons, Nokias, Huawei's, etc. I mean, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Johan, you wanted to come in on this.
No, I just want to add to say that there'll be some conversion. There's no doubt. I think it's already started, so to speak, But I also think that the hyperscalers will probably do well in trying to stay off and not buy up too much of that, because I think that they actually would be better off having a bunch of these telcos compete for that business ultimately that they're going to need to buy to serve the world.
Okay, thank you, Johan. And everybody wants in on this topic, so we'll come to Chris first, and then we'll come back up for Andy and then Duncan. So Chris, what's your view here?
As an analyst looking at the industry and looking at the telecom and the related industries, it's fascinating trying to analyse who's going to do what in the future. Through the other debates, we've seen what's going on in the sort of the stratification of the industry, so who's building what and who's delivering the services. But ultimately, we've got to flip it around and say what resources are needed for either individuals or businesses to achieve what they're trying to do, the outcomes. And that is a very different picture. And I think the relationship between the hyperscalers and their customers is one thing. I think often the telco relationship with its customers is a hidden relationship. We often only go back to it when there's an issue or we're renewing a contract. So I think it's just very, very different, very, very different cadences of interaction, to Sanjay's point about the touch points.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And Andy.
Yeah, so I certainly would agree with Sanjay's point, and in and around, you've two very different business models. So I think you'd be hard pressed to see the logic in a Google acquiring a Verizon, for instance, right? Because they're first of all, they're extremely different businesses. How they engage with their customers are different, their operations, et cetera. And frankly, just they're based on two very different premises. At the same time, I think that you're going to find friction points along the way, right? Particularly where there's applications, the things that telcos formerly did through other methods, right? So I think you'll continue to see some friction between the industries. I can't picture a scenario where you'd see direct M&A, and I think you'll probably also see kind of continued investments, whether it's LEO or fiber builds by some of the hyperscalers. Arguably, that could be game theory. I would tend to think that there's probably a bias on behalf of the hyperscalers not to be in the guys in trucks business, doing the utility type work.
Absolutely. And Duncan.
Yeah, so I think the key things we mentioned is collaboration. I think that's going to be the way to unlock the potential for everybody here. You may, get the potentials for some significant mergers and acquisitions along the way, but I think really the key point there that Sanjay mentioned, like innovation. You look at what Microsoft's are doing. Look what Red Hat's doing. With all the hyperscalers. With the joint managed service platforms out there. It's giving the customers choice, and I think the only way you can do that is by us all being collaborative and open, leveraging each other's strengths and identifying and agreeing together with our customers and the customers of our customers, how we engage that. And I personally just don't see that happening from an M&A perspective, because I think then you induce the risk of lock-in. And I think that is something that this industry cannot afford to happen again. Hence why I think there's been this big push, things like Kubernetes, from the open source marketplace. So I think that's what we're going to need to go and focus on more and more as a collective industry.
Okay, great. Well, great set of perspectives there. Thank you to everybody. Okay, we'll come to the next audience question now. Now, this question does come from somebody at a tier 1 operator, and it's very specific. And the question is, who should telcos bet on or choose amongst the hyperscalers to host a 5G core platform? So this is somebody looking for a bit of perspective here from the telco side of things. Would anybody like to start off the answers to this question? Okay, Andrew and then Sanjay.
Well, I'd say don't bet on a single hyperscaler, just like you wouldn't bet on a single vendor. I think initially, as you kind of test and push into this market, that may be fine, right? But above all else, we need to keep this ecosystem open. And as you push into it, there is a danger, a great danger that you kind of get more and more locked in. And we've kind of we thought we moved away from that world, and so keeping the system open is probably the biggest thing that you can do as you kind of go down this path.
Okay, so hedge your bets is the answer from Andrew. Sanjay.
Well, at a conceptual level, there is no question. I agree with Andrew that as a hyperscaler ourselves, we want any mobile core from any vendor to run on us. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are a platform business. And what we aim for is as many telco workloads that can run on our cloud, that can run on us, is a good thing. So we are extremely supportive of any mobile core vendor out there that wants to run a cloud native platform. Which then brings me to the second half, that we within Microsoft believe that having telco DNA as part of our Azure for Operators, very operator-focused offerings, is critical. Because this industry, whether you like it or not, admit it or not, is a highly specialized industry. And telco DNA becomes critical to make sure that any kind of mission-critical workloads, including the mobile core that an operator may want to run, runs with the level of security, runs with the level of performance, runs with the level of reliability that they are used to. And that's one of the reasons Microsoft acquired Affirm Networks and Metaswitch and others to bring that telco DNA in. So if you're an operator, you ask yourself these three basic questions. Is that mobile core cloud native? Can it run natively on any underlying cloud platform? Does it come with a strong telco DNA? And does it come with the right architecture in terms of, since we're talking about mobile core, can I separate the user plane from the control plane? Can I put the user plane as close to my customers as possible? All the things that mobile core that has traditionally not done, but is going to be required, whether from a private networks perspective, whether from an edge perspective, does it have all those elements to make that happen? And we like to believe that we have all those pieces.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. And that telco DNA will be coming up in our next question. We'll come to Johan next and then Duncan.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly, all eggs in one basket has never been great, right? For so many reasons. But I'd like to just throw out another thing to think about, because many times we just fall into like, which one should I choose, right? It's kind of become the norm to the point where we're talking about oligopolies and that kind of stuff in many areas and in types of services. So there are a lot of things that are happening in the market that I think the telcos should be extremely aware of and follow, right? One thing is that we mentioned at the beginning, the regulatory situation is becoming very complex. And I think it's critical to have some of those pieces as a fundament as you make your choices and how you move things forward. Technically, you don't want to lock into anybody. So doing cloud native Kubernetes could be one way, right? But regulatory, security-wise and so forth, how do you deal with those things? I think governments going forward will also have other requirements, such as, not building in too much vulnerability into how we deal with things from an IT perspective. So going with one or even just going with hyperscalers, I don't think it's the right approach, because there's going to be so many other areas that you're going to have to think about over the longer perspective that you will have to adhere to, and going with one or even just the hyperscalers will not be the way.
Okay, great. Thanks, Johan. So Duncan, next.
Yeah, I think, to the question, is there a single one from, what we're seeing dealing with our customers? It's most of our customers are on this, hybrid multi-cloud journey themselves at the moment. So I think, ultimately the winners will be the ones out there who've got the best ecosystems, from the core network functions to, the edge opportunities, and the ancillary industries. And we're seeing that, for example, from Red Hat's perspective at the moment, working with a number of, significant tier ones across the globe, where they're either looking to run, the Red Hat stack or open source technologies on top of, the Microsoft, Google, or the AWS cloud stack itself. Or what we're starting to see more and more is, the managed services coming through. So the need for things like ARO, from the Red Hat Microsoft partnership, and ROSA from the Red Hat AWS partnership, for example. I think it's giving more choice and flexibility. And I think, it's also unlocking this potential for the innovation that comes through those partnerships. I think it's also, the applications, they tend to be forgotten when we're, designing the platforms at the network level itself. But ultimately, it's these ISVs and even the NEPs. They ultimately want to develop once, deploy, multiple times across the network. And we saw that with the success of things like RHEL and other products out there like OpenShift. That I think that's the value, and I think it goes back to removing any form of locking. I think that's when innovation thrives, and I think that's where the winners will be. And from our engagements with customers, all three of the major hyperscalers have an opportunity ahead of them, but they need to be open. I think that's the fundamental crux being put on them by their customers, but the market in general.
Okay, so the main feedback here for our tier one person who asked the question is definitely avoid the lock-in. Andy, we'll come to you for the final comment on this, and then we'll come to, I think, what will be our final viewer question for today's show. So Andy.
Sure, thanks. I think, frankly, to Duncan's point, most of our clients are looking at this from a multi-cloud perspective. And then I think really it starts from what's your business strategy? How do you plan to differentiate? How do you segment your customer base? And then what do you want your specific offers to be? And then with that in mind, what are the different technology partners you want to engage? What capabilities do they bring? How are they going to co-invest to, attack those specific segments, right? So, as an example, one of our clients right now is very forthright in they want to own the financial services segment, right? And what are the capabilities needed to own that segment from an enterprise perspective? And then they started to look at which is the right hyperscaler partner, right, in terms of developing different solutions and different edge capabilities, right, for that industry. So even kind of getting down to that level and asking yourself strategically, how do you want to position and beat your competition as an operator, that starts to inform how you're going to engage your vendors and your technology solutions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andy. And I know Chris just wants to come in with a very quick point on this. So, Chris.
Well, apart from naming a company, Telco DNA, it does occur to me that, and I think Duncan mentioned this, that the NEPs, they're not NEPs anymore. They're moving themselves into being cloud native. And I think we should also bear in mind there are plenty of other players coming at this from, let's say, from Salesforce and other platforms, all the major players. They're all looking to gain ground. And I think it really comes down, as an analyst would always say, it depends, because it depends where you are, because of the reach of the hyperscalers. We've not even touched upon China and some of the Asian markets, but it also depends on the in-house skills and then how different suppliers fit into that relationship. So it's not, as we keep saying, every country market is different, every telco is different. I think you've got to stand in those shoes when making these decisions. Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay, and speaking of telco DNA, that comes is at the heart of what will be our final question. This is actually two questions melded together here. And the question is, the hyperscalers are hiring a lot of people from the telecom industry. Is this something that the telcos should be worried about, or something they should be glad to see? And then the second part of the question is, would a senior hyperscaler executive take a job at a CSP as readily as a telco person would take a job at a hyperscaler? So, should the telcos be happy to see people moving from the telco industry to the hyperscalers, or should they be a bit concerned? Okay, Andy, we'll come to you first.
So, first of all, I think it's not a bad thing when you see former colleagues and people who understand your business showing up at a partner, particularly if you're trying to make the ecosystem partnerships work, right? Having people that understand your business on the other side is going to help you get to the right answer. Presuming that you've built a business model and have the right kind of open innovation approach, where you can approach the hyperscaler in a way of essentially, how do we develop things and offers and products together that we can take to market, right? I think that if the CSPs maintain a closed innovation loop, then frankly, it's probably threatening. But I think one of the things you've kind of heard thematically from a number of folks today is that, in order for carriers to be successful here, they need to be open and engaged with the hyperscalers. So their former executives ending up on the other side is frankly, it's a positive because they speak the same language. And then, would you see someone from a hyperscaler going over to a carrier? I think that it's just a matter of time, and it's the right job, right? And I do think that there are opportunities at the carriers. I think that, frankly, they would be wise to do some recruiting from the hyperscalers, because there's a different mindset, there's a different approach to innovation, there's a different approach to the market that I think, frankly, would enthuse their thinking.
Okay, great. I can already hear some recruitment consultants frothing at the mouth there at that prospect. Sanjay, we'll come to you next. I thought you might have something to say about this question.
Two short answers, yes and yes, which is, in many ways reflecting what Andy said. The recruitment that you see from telco towards hyperscalers is both, you have to keep in mind, it's both organic and inorganic, right? Organic in the sense that oftentimes, as you have seen with AT&T and Microsoft, we are bringing in a lot of assets from AT&T, including people, to be able to run their cloud infrastructure. And that requires very specialized skill set on the telco side. And so bringing that in organically makes a lot of sense. Inorganically, in terms of just the recruitment cycle, and for us, Azure for Operators, as Satya has said, it's a strategic initiative, and it makes absolute sense to have the right telco people within the organization. The traffic going the other way is also very symbiotic, because every operator is struggling. In many cases, you can say most businesses are struggling with finding the right level of cloud expertise. And so as these partnerships become closer and closer, you will see quite seamless movement of people between both these verticals, the hyperscalers as well as the telcos.
Okay, thank you, Sanjay. And Duncan?
So yeah, as Sanjay said, yes and yes. I think it's a good thing. I think change is good for the soul, number one. But I think one of the things, like when we started looking at Red Hat in terms of how do we engage with the hyperscalers, in terms of like maintaining that innovation cycle with our existing customers, I think it comes down to the 3 Ps, people, product, and process. And when you move people and the processes, you bring in new mindsets, new ways of thinking, and ultimately new ways of innovating. So I think it's a good thing that you're seeing this movement from one pool to another, and also then flipping it back the other way. It just shakes things up a little bit, and I think that is a good thing fundamentally, because then you've got new problems but new opportunities to solve things together.
Okay, great. And then the final answer to this question and for the questions for this week, Johan.
All right, so I feel like the negative one here from a telco perspective, right? But I think there's would be I'll say yes, right? From a lot of perspectives as well. I think that this type of talent is very difficult to attract today, right? If there's too much of a flow, it's going to be very difficult for telcos to have that right talent, to be able to come on with those value-added services where they potentially want to compete in the future, and therefore building up a certain dependency. Having a few people move back and forth, of course, that's going to be a good thing in general, right? But I think keep a watchful eye, because of course there's risks in this as well. So I'll just leave it at that as a last point. Okay,
thank you, Johan. Well, I've been told for the last 5 minutes that we're out of time. I can't stretch us any further, so unfortunately, that's the end of our Q&A. Thanks very much for everybody who sent in questions, but I'll hand back over to Guy at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. We do need to bring our discussion to a close. It's been a fantastic discussion as well, which means that it's almost time to tally the final audience votes of the Great Telco Debate. To remind you, here is the motion that we have asked you to vote on. The hyperscalers represent an accelerated channel to the digital market for the CSPs. But before we reveal the results, let's first go and see which way our guests will vote, for or against. So look, you've all heard the motion, so let's have a show of hands, please. Those in favour of the motion, raise your hands now. Let's see who's in favour. 1, 2. Any advance on 2? No, we have 2. And those against the motion, raise your hands now. 1, 2, 3. Motion defeated by our studio guests. Oh, dearie me. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. You're great sports. Now, let's go and see how this compares with our online viewer vote. Our expert witnesses have voted, but what did you decide? Well, the voting is now closed. And here are the final numbers. Motion carried. What a turnaround from our online viewers. I can't quite see what those figures say, but it looks to be about 70% in favour and 30% against the motion. I need to get my eyes checked. Chris, are you surprised the difference here between our studio guests and our online guests, how they voted?
I love the discussion, and this notion of cross-contamination between telco and the hyperscalers really sort of gets to me. Am I surprised? No, I think it's very confusing. And I say it varies by telco, by CSP, as to what their relationship with the different hyperscalers will be. I think we lump them all together as analysts saying they're all hyperscalers, but actually, they bring different things to the table. I think a lot of the recruitment we talked about is actually for them trying to even out and become perhaps more homogeneous almost, but they do have very different things they bring to the table. The question for the telecom industry is how do we build a solid platform for the future? And frankly, we need the help of the hyperscalers. And it goes back to Howard's point, build what we can ourselves, leverage what they bring to the table as well. But that bifurcation, I think Andrew used the word earlier, that bifurcation between what the connectivity business is building and building up towards the hyperscalers, and what the hyperscalers are building down to it, brilliant. Great discussion.
Yeah, and Ray, your thoughts on the result?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much as I expected. I would say I'm more surprised at the vote in the live studio today. So, yeah, I think that was the surprise for me.
Well, this brings an end to our programme on telcos and the hyperscalers, and indeed the end of the great telco debate for another year. However, before we go, thank you to all of our sponsors for supporting this year's event and our online programme series, and thanks also to our industry partners. And of course, a big thank you to all of our guests, our expert witnesses. You all did a great job today, as did all the 35 guests who joined us this year. So thank you all very much indeed. And that is a wrap for the great telco debate of 2021. No, we weren't able to meet physically. We'll have to save that for next year's DSP Leaders World Forum, which returns in May to sunny Windsor, so we won't need these hats, just outside London, and a fabulous new venue. So we hope very much to see you there in person.
And meanwhile, our online summit series continues with the Green Network in January, and our Spotlight on 5G series returns in February. But of course, that is after the festive season.
Absolutely. For now, though, from all the team here at TelecomTV and the Great Telco Debate, thank you for watching. Enjoy the holidays, stay safe, and we'll see you next year. Goodbye.